The fever had come on so suddenly that Eleanor Dawson barely remembered collapsing in the dusty street of Los Animas, Colorado, her worn boots scraping against the wooden planks as her vision blurred and the scorching August sun of 1878 beat down mercilessly upon her trembling body. When she finally stirred to consciousness, she found herself being half carried, half dragged toward a building with a painted sign that read, "Dr. Whitmore, Physician," by two concerned shopkeepers who had witnessed her fall. Inside the cramped office that reeked of carbolic acid and old leather, Dr. Whitmore took one look at Eleanor's flushed face and glassy eyes before instructing his assistants to lay her on the examination table. She drifted in and out of awareness as he pressed cold instruments against her chest and peered into her eyes with a small lamp. The world spun around her, a kaleidoscope of brown wooden walls and concerned faces that blurred together like watercolors in the rain. "Pneumonia," the doctor announced gravely, washing his hands in a porcelain basin. "She needs immediate treatment, medicines, round-the-clock care, at least 2 weeks of recovery here under supervision." Eleanor tried to sit up, her body protesting with every movement. "I can pay," she whispered hoarsely, fumbling with the small leather pouch at her waist. Her trembling fingers managed to extract 3 crumpled dollar bills and a handful of coins. She held them out with a shaking hand, knowing even as she did so that it would not be enough. "Doctor." Whitmore barely glanced at the meager offering. "My fee for treatment of this severity is $50, plus $5 per day for the room and nursing care. That is the standard rate, miss. I am sorry, but I cannot work for free. I have my own expenses to consider." "Please," Eleanor managed to say, though speaking sent shooting pains through her chest. "This is all I have. I will work it off. I will do anything. I just need help." The doctor's face remained impassive, though not unkind. He had clearly had this conversation before. "I understand your predicament, truly I do. But I cannot treat every person who walks through my door without payment. If I did, I would be out of business within a month. There is a church mission 2 streets over. Perhaps they can offer you some charity care, though I warn you their facilities are quite basic." The room tilted dangerously, and Eleanor felt herself sliding off the examination table. One of the shopkeepers caught her, his expression pained. "Doc, she is in a bad way. Surely there must be something you can do." "I have given you my terms," Dr. Whitmore said firmly, already turning toward his desk where other patients' files awaited his attention. "I am sorry, but those are the facts of the matter." Eleanor felt tears burning behind her eyelids, though whether from fever or desperation she could not tell. She had come to Los Animas 3 months ago with such hope, escaping the suffocating expectations of her family in Boston, seeking adventure and independence in the wild territories of Colorado. She had found work as a seamstress, barely scraping together enough for rent and food in a tiny room above the general store. But last week the store had burned down, taking her few possessions and her employment with it. She'd been searching for new work when the illness struck, her body finally succumbing to weeks of poor nutrition and stress. The shopkeepers were helping her toward the door, murmuring apologies, when it swung open with such force that it banged against the wall. The man who filled the doorway had to duck his head to enter, and Eleanor's fevered mind struggled to process the sheer size of him. He stood well over 6 feet tall, with shoulders so broad they seemed to span the width of the frame. His hair, dark brown and sun-streaked, fell past his shoulders in waves that suggested he cut it himself when it grew too bothersome. A thick beard covered the lower half of his face, but could not hide the strong jaw beneath. He wore buckskin clothing that had seen hard use, and his arms, bare below rolled-up sleeves, were corded with muscle that spoke of years of hard physical labor in the mountains. "Heard there was a woman needing help," the man said, his voice a deep rumble that seemed to resonate in Eleanor's chest. His eyes, startlingly blue against his sun-darkened skin, swept the room and landed on her with an intensity that made her breath catch even through the haze of fever. "This is a private medical matter," Dr. Whitmore said stiffly, clearly displeased by the interruption. "I must ask you to leave." The mountain man ignored him completely, his gaze still fixed on Eleanor. He crossed the room in 3 long strides, and suddenly she was looking up into those blue eyes from much too close. She could smell pine and wood smoke and clean mountain air clinging to him, such a contrast to the stale sickness smell of the doctor's office that she almost sobbed with relief. "You are burning up," he said, and despite his size, his touch on her forehead was surprisingly gentle. His hand felt blessedly cool against her fevered skin. "Doc, what does she need?" "As I told the young lady, treatment for pneumonia requires extensive care and medication. My fee is $50 plus $5 per day for room and nursing care. Since she cannot pay, I have suggested she try the church mission." Dr. Whitmore's tone was clipped, clearly expecting this stranger to leave now that he understood the situation. Instead, the mountain man reached into his pocket and pulled out a leather wallet that looked as worn and weathered as his clothing. He counted out bills with hands that dwarfed the currency, then placed a neat stack on the doctor's desk. "There is $80. That should cover 2 weeks. If she needs more time, I will pay for that too. Get started." "Doctor." Whitmore stared at the money, then at the mountain man, his expression caught between surprise and suspicion. "And who exactly are you to this woman?" "Someone who does not believe in letting people die in the street when there is help to be had." The mountain man's voice remained level, but there was an edge to it now that made the doctor take a step back. "Are you going to treat her or not?" Yes, of course." Dr. Whitmore scooped up the money with hands that trembled slightly. "Gentlemen, help me get her to the recovery room, and you, sir, you can wait in the front office." "I will stay with her," the mountain man said, in a tone that brooked no argument. "That is highly irregular. She needs rest and quiet treatment, not visitors." "Then I will be quiet." The mountain man carefully scooped Eleanor up as if she weighed nothing at all, cradling her against his broad chest. The world swayed sickeningly, but his arms felt steady and safe, and Eleanor found herself leaning into his warmth despite not knowing who he was or why he was helping her. "Show me where to take her." Dr. Whitmore's mouth opened and closed a few times before he apparently decided that arguing with this man was futile. He led the way through a narrow hallway to a small back room that contained a simple bed, a washstand, and a single wooden chair. The mountain man laid Eleanor on the bed with surprising care, even adjusting the thin pillow beneath her head. "What's your name?" Eleanor managed to whisper, catching his sleeve before he could step away. He looked down at her and something in his expression softened. Hank Zander." Eleanor Dawson." Each word felt like pushing a boulder uphill, but she needed to know. "Why are you helping me?" Hank was quiet for a moment, his large hand still resting on the bed near her shoulder. "I came down from my cabin in the mountains to sell some furs and pick up supplies. Stopped at the saloon for a drink and heard the barkeep talking about a woman the doc turned away because she could not pay. My ma died of fever when I was 12 because we could not afford proper medicine. I swore then that if I ever had the means, I would not let that happen to someone else if I could prevent it." His jaw tightened beneath the beard. "Money sitting in my pocket does no good if it cannot be used to help someone who needs it." Eleanor felt tears sliding down her temples into her hair. "I will pay you back. I do not know how or when, but I promise I will. We can talk about that when you are well." Hank's voice gentled. "Right now, you need to focus on getting better." Dr. Whitmore bustled into the room carrying a tray laden with brown bottles and clean cloths. "I need to examine her properly and administer the first round of medication. You will have to wait outside for this." Hank's hand moved to cover Eleanor's for just a moment, his rough palm warm and solid against her cold fingers. "I will be right outside the door." Then he straightened to his full imposing height and fixed the doctor with a steady look. "You take good care of her, Doc, real good care." The next hours passed in a blur of bitter medicines and cool cloths pressed to her burning skin. Dr. Whitmore proved to be competent once he was being paid, administering tinctures and syrups with practiced efficiency. He helped her sip willow bark tea for the fever and propped her up on extra pillows to help her breathe. But through it all, Eleanor remained aware of the presence just beyond the door. Once, when she cried out from the pain in her chest, she heard a chair scrape and heavy footsteps approach, only stopping when the doctor called out that everything was under control. As evening shadows crept across the room, Dr. Whitmore finally emerged from Eleanor's room looking tired. Hank stood immediately from where he had been sitting in the waiting area, his large frame tense with concern. How is she? The fever is very high, but I've administered quinine and other medications that should help. The next 48 hours will be critical. If the fever breaks, she has a good chance of recovery. If not, the doctor trailed off meaningfully. She will need constant monitoring tonight. I have evening rounds to make at several other homes. I can check on her again in the morning. You're leaving? Hank's voice dropped dangerously low. You said she needs constant monitoring. I have other patients who also require my attention. The medications have been administered. There is little more I can do tonight except wait and see how she responds. Doctor. Whitmore was already reaching for his coat and medical bag. If there is a dramatic change, you can fetch me from my home 2 streets over. The address is on my card. Hank stepped directly into the doctor's path, and suddenly the office felt very small. I paid you for her care. That includes your time. And I have provided my professional services. But I am one man, sir, with many patients. I cannot sit by her bedside all night when there are others who need me. The doctor's voice rose with frustration. If you are so concerned, you are welcome to stay with her yourself. Make sure she drinks water regularly. Change the cool cloths on her forehead every 30 minutes. If she starts coughing blood or goes into convulsions, come get me immediately. Otherwise, I will return first thing in the morning. With that, Dr. Whitmore edged around Hank and out the door, leaving the mountain man standing alone in the dim office. For a long moment, Hank stared at the closed door, his hands clenched into fists at his sides. Then he took a deep breath, unclenched his hands, and walked back to Eleanor's room. She looked so small in the narrow bed, her dark hair spread across the pillow in tangles, her face flushed with fever. Her breathing came in short, labored gasps that made Hank's chest tighten with an emotion he could not quite name. He had seen her for all of 10 minutes, knew nothing about her except her name, and yet something about her had reached past all the walls he had built around himself during his solitary years in the mountains. Maybe it was the way she had tried to sit up and bargain with the doctor, despite clearly being desperately ill, showing a core of strength that resonated with him. Maybe it was the vulnerability in her eyes when she had asked why he was helping her, as if kindness was something so foreign she could not comprehend it. Or maybe it was simply that she reminded him of his mother, who had worked herself to exhaustion trying to provide for him and his siblings, who had deserved so much better than dying alone because they could not afford a doctor's fee. Whatever the reason, Hank knew he was not leaving this room until Eleanor was out of danger. He pulled the wooden chair closer to the bed and settled his large frame onto it as comfortably as possible. Then he dampened one of the cloths in the basin of cool water the doctor had left and carefully laid it across Eleanor's forehead. Her eyes fluttered open, unfocused and glassy. Hank, I am here. He kept his voice low and soothing. The doc had to step out, but I'm going to stay with you tonight. Make sure you are all right. You should not. Her words slurred together slightly. Should not have to. There is nowhere else I need to be. And as he said it, Hank realized it was true. His cabin would still be there tomorrow, his solitary life waiting for him whenever he chose to return to it. But right now, this woman needed someone, and he found he wanted to be that someone with an intensity that surprised him. Eleanor's hand moved weakly on top of the blanket, and Hank took it without thinking, engulfing her small fingers in his much larger ones. She sighed, and some of the tension seemed to leave her body. Within moments, she had drifted back into fevered sleep. The night stretched long and dark. Hank kept his promise, changing the cloths on Eleanor's forehead every 30 minutes, coaxing water between her cracked lips whenever she stirred. Several times her fever spiked dramatically, and she became delirious, calling out names he did not recognize and speaking in broken sentences about things he could not follow. During one particularly bad spell, she thrashed weakly, and Hank had to gently hold her shoulders to keep her from falling out of bed. Shh, you are safe, he murmured, the words feeling awkward in his mouth. He had not comforted anyone in years, had barely spoken to anyone beyond brief transactions in town. Eleanor, you are safe. I am here. Something in his voice must have reached her even through the delirium, because she stilled, her glassy eyes fixing on his face. Do not let them send me back, she whispered. Please, I cannot go back. No one is sending you anywhere, Hank promised, smoothing damp hair back from her forehead. You just rest now. Get better. As dawn light began filtering through the single window, Eleanor's fever finally broke. Hank felt it happen, the scorching heat of her skin gradually easing to merely warm, her breathing becoming deeper and more regular. Relief flooded through him so powerfully that his hands shook as he checked her forehead again to be sure. She fell into what looked like genuine sleep rather than fever-induced unconsciousness, her face peaceful for the first time since he had seen her. Hank leaned back in the chair, suddenly aware of how exhausted he was. His back ached from sitting hunched over most of the night, and his eyes burned with fatigue, but he allowed himself a small smile as he watched Eleanor sleep. She had made it through the worst. Now, she just needed time to heal. Dr. Whitmore arrived shortly after sunrise, looking well-rested and surprised to find Hank still in the chair beside Eleanor's bed. The mountain man was dozing, his chin on his chest, but he jerked awake the moment the door opened, his hand instinctively moving toward the knife at his belt before he recognized the doctor. "I see she made it through the night," Dr. Whitmore said, moving forward to check Eleanor's pulse and temperature. After a thorough examination, he nodded with satisfaction. "The fever has broken. That is an excellent sign. She's not out of danger yet, but her chances of recovery are much improved." "What does she need now?" Hank's voice was rough from disuse and exhaustion. "Rest, primarily. Fluids and light foods when she's able to take them. The medications should be continued for at least another week to prevent relapse. I will check on her twice daily." The doctor studied Hank with an expression that might have been grudging respect. "You did well last night. You may have saved her life." Hank just shrugged, uncomfortable with the praise. "I did what needed doing." "Yes, well." Dr. Whitmore cleared his throat. "I have morning rounds to make. I will return this afternoon. There's a boarding house 2 streets south if you need to rest properly. Mrs. Chen runs a clean establishment with reasonable rates." But Hank shook his head. He had no intention of leaving Eleanor alone, not yet. Not until he was certain she was truly stable. "I will stay." Over the next 3 days, Hank barely left Eleanor's side. He slept in snatches on the uncomfortable wooden chair, declining Dr. Whitmore's repeated suggestions that he find proper lodging. He was there when Eleanor woke for longer periods, helping her sip water and broth, supporting her when she needed to sit up. He read to her from an old newspaper when she was bored, his deep voice stumbling over words he was not accustomed to speaking aloud. He did not talk much about himself, deflecting her questions with gentle stubbornness, but he listened intently when she spoke, learning about her life in fragments and pieces. She had been the youngest daughter of a wealthy Boston family, expected to make a good marriage to further her father's business connections. But Eleanor had wanted more than parlor conversations and managing a household. She had dreamed of the West, of the freedom and possibility she had read about in dime novels and newspaper accounts. When she turned 21 and gained access to a small inheritance from her grandmother, she had packed a single bag and left in the middle of the night, knowing her parents would never approve. "They must be worried about you," Hank said during one of these conversations, sitting with his elbows on his knees so he could be closer to eye level with her. Eleanor shook her head. "I left them a letter explaining my decision, and I have written twice since arriving here, letting them know I am well and not to look for me. My father wrote back once, saying I had shamed the family and was no longer welcome in their home until I came to my senses and returned properly contrite." Her voice remained steady, but Hank saw the hurt in her eyes. "So no, I do not think they are worried. I think they have simply written me off as a loss." Anger flared in Hank's chest, hot and unexpected. What kind of parents turned their back on their daughter for wanting to live her own life? But he kept his voice calm when he spoke. "Then they are fools. Takes a lot of courage to leave everything you know and strike out on your own. That is not something to be ashamed of." Eleanor looked at him for a long moment, something shifting in her expression. "Thank you for saying that. And thank you for everything else. For paying the doctor, for staying with me through the worst of it. I meant what I said, Hank. I will find a way to repay you." "Like I said before, we can worry about that when you are fully recovered." Hank shifted in his chair, suddenly uncomfortable with the gratitude in her eyes. "Right now you just need to focus on getting your strength back." By the 4th day, Eleanor was able to sit up for extended periods and eat solid food, though she tired easily, and the coughing fits still racked her body with alarming regularity. "Doctor," Whitmore pronounced himself pleased with her progress and suggested she might be well enough to leave his care within another week, provided she had somewhere suitable to recuperate. That evening, after the doctor had left, Eleanor brought up the question that had clearly been weighing on her mind. "Hank, where will I go when I'm released from here? The room I had been renting is gone, and I have no employment. I've been thinking perhaps I could travel to Denver. It is a larger city. There might be more opportunities there." Hank had been thinking about this too, though his thoughts had taken a very different direction. The idea of Eleanor traveling to Denver alone, still weak from illness and with no prospects, made his jaw clench with worry. Denver was rough, full of men who would see a woman alone as easy prey. But he also knew he had no right to dictate her choices. They had known each other less than a week, and most of that time she had been too ill to really talk. Yet it felt like longer. Something about the intimacy of those long nights, of caring for her through her most vulnerable moments, had created a bond that Hank could not quite explain. He caught himself watching her when she slept, memorizing the curve of her cheek and the way her hair fell across her shoulders. He found himself looking forward to the moments when she was awake and they could talk, her sharp mind and quick humor showing through more as she healed. He told her things he had not told anyone in years, about his life in the mountains, his simple cabin, the peace he found in the solitude. "Or," Hank said slowly, the words forming even as he knew he was stepping off a cliff, "you could come to my cabin until you are fully recovered. It is about a half-day's ride into the mountains, but it is clean and comfortable. There is plenty of space, and you would have time to regain your full strength before making any decisions about what comes next." Eleanor's eyes widened. "I could not possibly impose on you like that. You have already done so much." "It would not be an imposition." Hank leaned forward, holding her gaze. "Truth is, I would feel better knowing you were somewhere safe while you heal. The cabin has 2 rooms. You would have your privacy. And when you are fully well, if you still want to go to Denver or anywhere else, I will take you there myself and make sure you have enough money to get started. But at least this way, you would not be rushing into something before you are really ready." She studied him for a long moment, and Hank wondered what she saw. A rough mountain man with more muscle than sense, probably. A stranger who had inserted himself into her life for reasons she probably did not fully trust. He knew he should not push, should accept whatever decision she made. But the thought of her leaving, of never seeing her again, sent a strange ache through his chest. "Why are you doing this?" Eleanor asked softly. "And please do not say it is just because of your mother. This is more than that, is it not?" Hank had never been good with words, had spent too many years alone to remember how to express complex feelings. But something in Eleanor's direct gaze demanded honesty. "I do not fully understand it myself," he admitted. "But yes, it is more than just my mother. From the moment I saw you in that office, looking so determined to survive even when you could barely stand, something just clicked into place. I know that probably sounds strange. We have only known each other a few days. But I cannot shake the feeling that I'm supposed to help you, supposed to be here. And the idea of you going off alone, still recovering, to a city where anything could happen." He shook his head. "I just want to know you are safe. That's all." "That's not all," Eleanor said quietly, but there was no accusation in her tone. Just acknowledgement. "I feel it too. This connection. I thought maybe it was just gratitude or fever making me confused, but it is still there now that I'm clearer-headed. When you are not in the room, I find myself listening for your footsteps. When you are here, I feel safer than I have felt in months." She took a shaky breath. "But I do not want to be a burden, and I do not want you to feel obligated." "You are not a burden." Hank reached out and took her hand, marveling again at how small it felt in his. "And I do not feel obligated. I feel," he struggled for the right word, "protective, drawn to you, like maybe I came down from that mountain at exactly the right time for exactly the right reason." Eleanor's fingers tightened around his. "Then yes, I would like to come to your cabin, at least until I am fully well." "Thank you, Hank." Relief and something warmer flooded through him. "You do not need to thank me. I'm glad you are coming." They smiled at each other, and for a moment, the dingy little recovery room felt full of possibility. The next week passed in a steady rhythm of recovery and growing companionship. Dr. Whitmore continued his twice-daily visits, and under his care, Eleanor's strength returned gradually. The coughing fits became less frequent and less severe. Color returned to her cheeks. She was able to walk around the small room without becoming winded, then venture into the doctor's front office for short periods. Hank used the time to prepare for the journey to his cabin. He bought supplies from the general store, including fabric for new dresses for Eleanor since she had lost everything in the fire. When he presented her with the wrapped package, she had tears in her eyes. "You keep spending money on me," she protested weakly. "Money is meant to be spent," Hank replied simply. "And you need clothes. Besides, I sold 3 months' worth of furs. I can afford it." He also bought a gentle mare from the livery stable, knowing Eleanor would not be strong enough to ride double with him all the way to the cabin. The stable owner, recognizing Hank from previous trips to town, gave him a fair price and threw in a saddle that had been gathering dust. "Taking on a wife?" the man asked with a knowing grin. Hank felt his ears heat. "Just helping someone who needs it." "Uh-huh. Well, you picked a good horse for a lady rider. Sweet-tempered and steady. Just what your friend needs." Hank chose not to dignify that with a response, but as he led the mare back to the stable behind the doctor's office, he could not help wondering what it would be like if Eleanor was coming to his cabin as his wife rather than just a temporary guest. The thought should have terrified him. He had been alone by choice for 8 years, ever since he left his childhood home in Missouri to make his way west. He had tried settling in towns, working as a ranch hand and a logger, but the press of people always left him feeling suffocated and restless. The mountains had called to him, and he had answered, building his cabin in a secluded valley where he could go weeks without seeing another human being. He had told himself he preferred it that way, that he was not meant for the complications of relationships and domesticity, that solitude was freedom. But now, imagining Eleanor in his cabin, sitting by his fire, sharing meals at his table, that solitude suddenly seemed less like freedom and more like loneliness, and the thought of her eventually leaving, of returning to his empty cabin alone, made something in his chest constrict painfully. He was in trouble, Hank realized, deep trouble, because somewhere in the past week and a half, he had started falling for Eleanor Dawson, and he had absolutely no idea what to do about it. On the morning of their planned departure, Dr. Whitmore gave Eleanor a final examination and pronounced her well enough to travel, though he cautioned against any strenuous activity for at least another month. "Keep taking the medicine I have given you," he instructed, handing Hank several brown bottles. "1 spoonful of this 3 times daily with meals, and this other one at bedtime. If the coughing worsens or the fever returns, you need to get her back to a doctor immediately." "I will take good care of her," Hank promised. "See that you do." The doctor looked between them thoughtfully. "I will admit, when you first burst into my office, I took you for just another rough mountain man. But you have surprised me. Miss Dawson is fortunate to have found such a dedicated friend." After settling the final bill and thanking Dr. Whitmore, Hank helped Eleanor outside where the horses waited. She moved slowly, still regaining her strength, but she managed to mount the mare with only minimal assistance. Hank had bought her proper riding clothes from the general store, and seeing her in the split skirt and sensible boots, her dark hair braided down her back, made his heart skip in a way he was becoming alarmingly familiar with. "Ready?" he asked, settling onto his own horse, a large gelding used to carrying his weight through mountain trails. Eleanor took a deep breath of the clear morning air and smiled. "Ready?" They rode out of Los Animas as the sun climbed higher, leaving behind the dusty streets and scattered buildings for the open terrain that led toward the mountains. Hank kept the pace easy, constantly checking to make sure Eleanor was managing all right. She sat her horse well, showing the effects of expensive riding lessons in her youth, though he could see the effort it cost her to maintain her posture. Around midday, Hank called a halt near a small creek where cottonwood trees provided shade. He helped Eleanor dismount, noting the way she tried to hide how tired she was, and spread a blanket for her to rest on while he unpacked the lunch he had prepared. "This is beautiful," Eleanor said, looking around at the landscape. The plains were beginning to give way to foothills, with the dramatic peaks of the Sangre de Cristo Mountains rising in the distance. "So different from Boston. Do you miss it? The city, I mean." Hank handed her a sandwich and a canteen of water. Eleanor considered the question while she ate. Sometimes I miss certain things. The libraries, the theaters. My younger sister, though we were never particularly close. But mostly no. Life there felt like wearing a corset that was laced too tight. I could never quite take a full breath. She smiled at him. Out here, even recovering from pneumonia, I feel like I can finally breathe properly. I know what you mean. Hank stretched out on the grass nearby, propping himself up on one elbow. That is why I came to the mountains, needed space to breathe. They talked easily while they rested, and Hank found himself sharing more of his past. He told her about growing up in Missouri, the fourth of 6 children in a family that struggled to make ends meet. How his father had died in a mining accident when Hank was 10, leaving his mother to raise them alone. How they had scraped by on her work as a laundress until the fever took her 2 years later. The church took us in after that, Hank said, his voice roughening at the memory. Split us up among different families. I never saw some of my siblings again. The family I went to was not cruel, but they made it clear I was there to work, not to be one of them. So as soon as I was old enough, I left. Figured I would make my own way. That must have been so hard, Eleanor said softly, to lose your parents and then your siblings too. Hank shrugged, uncomfortable with sympathy. It was a long time ago. I turned out all right. You turned out better than all right. Eleanor's voice was firm. You are one of the best men I have ever met, Hank Zander. He looked at her startled and found her gazing at him with such warmth that his breath caught. For a moment they just stared at each other, the air between them charged with unspoken feelings. Then Hank cleared his throat and stood abruptly. We should keep moving. Want to reach the cabin before dark. The rest of the journey took them deeper into the mountains, following trails that grew progressively narrower and steeper. Eleanor handled it well, though Hank could see exhaustion setting in as the afternoon wore on. Finally, as the sun was beginning to sink toward the western peaks, they rounded a bend, and his cabin came into view. It sat in a small valley, surrounded by towering pines and aspens whose leaves were just beginning to turn gold with the approaching autumn. A stream ran nearby, its water crystal clear over smooth stones. The cabin itself was solidly built from logs Hank had cut himself, with a stone chimney and a covered porch. It was not fancy, but it was well made and weather-tight. "Oh, Hank," Eleanor breathed, "it is wonderful." Pride warmed his chest at her obvious delight. "Come on, let me show you inside." He helped her down from the mare and led her up the porch steps. The door opened into the main room, which served as kitchen, dining area, and living space. A large stone fireplace dominated one wall, with comfortable chairs arranged before it. Handmade furniture, simple but sturdy, filled the space. Everything was meticulously clean and organized, showing Hank's care for his home. "The bedroom is through there," Hank said, gesturing to a door on the left. "You will take it. I will sleep out here by the fire." "I cannot take your bed," Eleanor protested. "Yes, you can. You're still recovering and you need proper rest. I have slept on worse than a bedroll by the fire, believe me." His tone left no room for argument. Eleanor looked like she wanted to protest further, but another yawn overtook her. The long ride had clearly exhausted her. Hank quickly started a fire to take the chill off the evening air, then showed her the bedroom. It was simple, like the rest of the cabin, containing a large bed covered in quilts, a dresser, and a washstand. "There is water in the pitcher and clean towels in the drawer," Hank said. "You rest while I take care of the horses and make some dinner." "Let me help with dinner," Eleanor offered, but Hank shook his head. "Not tonight. You're dead on your feet. Go on, lie down for a bit. I will call you when food is ready." This time Eleanor did not argue. She simply gave him a tired smile and disappeared into the bedroom, closing the door softly behind her. Hank stood there for a moment, struck by how right it felt to have her here in his space. Then he shook himself and headed back outside to tend to the horses. By the time he had the animals settled in the small stable behind the cabin, brushed down and fed, darkness had fallen. Hank returned to the cabin and prepared a simple meal of beans, bacon, and cornbread. When it was ready, he knocked gently on the bedroom door. Eleanor emerged, looking more rested, though she still moved with the careful slowness of someone not yet fully recovered. They ate at the small table, and Hank was pleased to see her appetite was good. After dinner, he insisted she go back to bed while he cleaned up. I feel useless, Eleanor said with frustration. You are doing everything. You are recovering, Hank corrected. That is your job right now. My job is taking care of everything else. We each do our part. Over the next few weeks, they fell into a comfortable routine. Each morning, Hank would wake early and start the fire, then make breakfast. Eleanor's strength returned gradually, and soon she was able to help with cooking and light household tasks. She proved to be an excellent cook, much better than Hank, and their meals improved dramatically under her guidance. She also brought an energy to the cabin that it had been missing. She hummed while she worked, reorganized his kitchen in ways that actually made more sense, and filled the quiet spaces with conversation and laughter. Hank found himself hurrying through his daily chores, just so he could get back to the cabin and be near her. They talked for hours, sharing their thoughts and dreams and histories. Hank learned that Eleanor had loved reading since childhood, that she could speak French and play piano, that she had a wicked sense of humor that caught him off guard and made him laugh in ways he had not in years. She learned that despite his rough exterior, Hank was remarkably well-read himself, that he had taught himself to carve wood and could create beautiful pieces from simple blocks, that he had a deep love for the natural world and could identify every plant and animal in these mountains. One afternoon, about 3 weeks after their arrival, Eleanor emerged from the cabin carrying the packet of fabric Hank had bought for her dresses. "I've been thinking," she said, settling onto the porch steps where Hank was repairing a broken trap. "I could make curtains for the windows, brighten the place up a bit, if you would not mind, that is." Hank looked up from his work. The idea of permanent touches being added to his cabin, of Eleanor putting her mark on his space, should have made him uncomfortable. Instead, it sent a warm glow through his chest. "I think that would be real nice." Eleanor beamed at him and began measuring the fabric, chattering about patterns and colors. Hank went back to his trap, but he found himself watching her more than working, captivated by the way the afternoon sunlight caught in her dark hair, the small furrow that appeared between her brows when she concentrated, the graceful movements of her hands. "Hank," Eleanor's voice pulled him from his thoughts. "Can I ask you something?" "Sure." "Why have you never married? You are a good man, clearly capable of taking care of yourself and a family. I would think women would be lining up." Hank set down his tools, considering how to answer. "I guess I never met anyone who made me want to give up the solitude. Town women always seem to want me to be something I'm not. Cleaner, more civilized, more interested in settling down proper in a community. And I just could not do it, could not pretend to be something I'm not." He paused, then added quietly, "Until recently, I thought maybe I was just meant to be alone, that I was not made for companionship." "And now?" Eleanor's voice was soft, her hands stilled in her sewing. "Now I'm starting to think maybe I was just waiting for the right person, someone who would not want to change me, who could be happy with this life, who could make the cabin feel like a home instead of just a place to sleep." He met her eyes. "Someone like you." The words hung in the air between them, heavy with implication. Eleanor set down her sewing and moved to sit beside him on the steps, close enough that their shoulders almost touched. "Hank, I need to tell you something. These past weeks with you, they have been the happiest of my life. I know that might sound strange, given that I was recovering from a near-fatal illness, but it is true. Being here with you in this beautiful place, I feel more myself than I ever have, and I have come to care for you, deeply." Hank's heart was pounding so hard, he was sure she must be able to hear it. "I care for you too, more than I probably should given we have not known each other long. But Eleanor, I need you to be certain about what you are feeling. You have been through a lot, nearly dying, losing everything you owned, being rejected by that doctor. I do not want you to confuse gratitude with something deeper, or to feel obligated because I helped you." Eleanor shook her head firmly. "This is not gratitude or obligation. Yes, you saved my life, and I will always be thankful for that. But what I feel for you goes far beyond thanks. You are kind and strong and gentle. You listen when I talk. You make me laugh. You have given me space to heal, not just physically, but emotionally too. And when I think about the future, about what I want my life to look like, you are in it. You are at the center of it." Hank reached out and cupped her face gently in his large, calloused hand. "Are you sure? Because once I kiss you, once we start down this path, I am not going to be able to let you go. You need to know that. If you are mine for keeps." "Then kiss me," Eleanor whispered, "because I do not want you to let me go. Ever." Hank leaned in slowly, giving her time to change her mind, but Eleanor met him halfway. Their lips touched, gentle at first, tentative. Then Eleanor's hand came up to rest against his chest, and the kiss deepened. Hank tried to be careful, mindful of his size and strength, but Eleanor pressed closer, her fingers curling into his shirt. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Hank rested his forehead against hers. "I love you," he said, the words rough but sincere. "I know it is fast, maybe too fast, but I do. I love you, Eleanor." "I love you too." Eleanor's smile was brilliant. "And it is not too fast. When something is right, you know it. I knew it that first day when you carried me into the doctor's office and refused to leave. I knew it every day since. This is right, Hank. We are right." They kissed again, longer this time, and when they finally pulled apart, Hank felt like his entire world had shifted. The future he had imagined, solitary and simple, had been replaced by something richer and fuller. A future with Eleanor by his side, filling his cabin with warmth and laughter and love. As autumn deepened into winter, Hank and Eleanor's relationship blossomed. They continued to sleep separately, Hank insisting on propriety despite Eleanor's protests that they were adults and alone in the mountains where no one would judge them. But in every other way, they functioned as a couple, sharing the work and the companionship, growing closer with each passing day. Hank taught Eleanor to shoot, patient as she learned to handle the rifle. He took her on long walks through the mountains, showing her his favorite places, the hidden meadows and scenic overlooks. Eleanor taught him card games she had learned in Boston, and they spent long winter evenings playing while the fire crackled and snow piled up outside. One cold December evening, as they sat by the fire after dinner, Hank cleared his throat nervously. "Eleanor, I have been thinking. About us. About the future." Eleanor set down the shirt she had been mending and gave him her full attention. "What about it?" "Well, I know we have not been together long. Just a few months, really. But every day I'm more certain that you are what I have been missing all these years. You fit here, with me, like you were always meant to be here." He took a deep breath. "I want you to stay. Permanently. As my wife." He pulled a small carved wooden box from his pocket and opened it to reveal a simple gold ring. "I know it is not fancy. I had to ride into town and buy it from the jeweler, and it is probably not what you are used to from your life in Boston. But it is real gold, and it is given with a real heart. Will you marry me, Eleanor?" Tears welled in Eleanor's eyes, but she was smiling. "Yes, yes, of course I will marry you. And the ring is perfect. Everything about this is perfect." Hank slipped the ring onto her finger, his hands trembling slightly with emotion. Then he pulled her into his arms, holding her close. "I will spend every day trying to make you happy," he promised. "I swear it." "You already make me happy," Eleanor murmured against his chest, "every single day." They decided to wait until spring to have the wedding, when the passes would be clear and they could easily travel to Los Animas to have the ceremony performed. But in their hearts, they were already married. That night, Eleanor did not return to the bedroom alone, and Hank did not sleep by the fire. They came together with tenderness and passion, two people who had found in each other exactly what they needed. The winter passed in a blur of snow and contentment. They were completely isolated in their mountain valley, with drifts sometimes reaching 5 feet high around the cabin, but they did not mind. They had each other, and that was enough. They read books aloud, played games, made love, and planned their future together. "I want children," Eleanor said one evening, curled up against Hank's side in bed. "At least 2 or 3. I want them to grow up here, wild and free, learning to love these mountains the way you do." "I want that too," Hank said, his hand moving to rest on her flat stomach. "I want to give them the childhood I never had, stability, love, 2 parents who adore them and each other." "They will have that," Eleanor promised. "We will make sure of it." When spring finally arrived, melting the snow and coaxing new growth from the earth, Hank and Eleanor prepared for their trip to town. They rode down the mountain together, Eleanor now an accomplished rider, completely at ease on her mare. Las Animas seemed both familiar and foreign after months away, louder and more crowded than Eleanor remembered. Their first stop was the church, where they arranged for the wedding to take place the following day. The pastor was a kind, older man who beamed when he heard their story. "The Lord works in mysterious ways," he said. "Who would have thought that a terrible illness would lead to such happiness?" Next, they stopped at the doctor's office. Dr. Whitmore was surprised but pleased to see Eleanor looking so healthy and vibrant. "Marriage clearly agrees with you," he said with a smile, "even before the ceremony. You look like a completely different woman from the one I treated last summer." "I am a completely different woman," Eleanor agreed. "Thanks in large part to you. If you had not been willing to treat me once Hank paid, I would not be here today." The doctor had the grace to look slightly abashed. "Yes, well, I'm glad it worked out." He glanced at Hank. "You are a good man. Take care of her." Every day, Hank promised. They invited the few townspeople they knew to the wedding, Dr. Whitmore, the shopkeepers who had tried to help Eleanor that first day, Mrs. Chen from the boarding house, and a few others they had met during their time in town. It was a small gathering, but warm and genuine. Eleanor wore a new dress she had sewn herself from fabric Hank had bought, a simple but elegant design in deep blue that matched her eyes. Hank wore his best clothes, his hair trimmed and his beard neatly groomed. When Eleanor walked down the aisle toward him, Hank felt his throat tighten with emotion. She was so beautiful, and she had chosen him. He would never stop being amazed by that. The ceremony was brief but meaningful. They exchanged vows, promising to love and honor each other for the rest of their lives. When the pastor pronounced them husband and wife, Hank kissed Eleanor with all the love and tenderness in his heart, and their small audience applauded enthusiastically. Afterward, Mrs. Chen hosted a small reception at her boarding house, providing cake and lemonade. It was not fancy, but it was filled with genuine happiness and good wishes. Several people came up to Hank and Eleanor privately to tell them how much their story had touched the town, how it had reminded people that kindness and love still existed even in the rough Wild West. "You two give people hope," Dr. Whitmore said quietly to Hank while Eleanor was talking with some of the women. "In a world that can be harsh and unforgiving, your willingness to help someone you did not even know, and the love that grew from it, that matters. Do not ever forget that." As they rode back up into the mountains the next day, now legally husband and wife, Eleanor leaned over from her horse and took Hank's hand. "Happy?" she asked. "Happier than I ever thought possible," Hank replied honestly. "You have given me everything, Eleanor. A reason to come down from this mountain, a reason to stay connected to the world. You have given me a family, even if it is just the two of us right now." "Not for too much longer, I hope," Eleanor said with a mischievous smile. "I've been thinking we should start working on those children we talked about." Hank felt heat rise in his face, but he grinned back at her. "I think that can be arranged." They spent that summer building their life together in earnest. Hank expanded the cabin, adding a second bedroom for future children and enlarging the main living space. Eleanor planted a garden, growing vegetables and herbs, and she began preserving food for the coming winter. They worked side by side, partners in every sense of the word. In the evenings, they would sit on the porch and watch the sun set over the mountains, Hank's arm around Eleanor's shoulders, her head resting against his chest. They would talk about their day, make plans for tomorrow, simply enjoy being together. It was simple, but it was everything they needed. By late summer, Eleanor's suspicions were confirmed when she missed her monthly courses for the second time. She was pregnant. When she told Hank, he picked her up and spun her around, laughing with pure joy. Then he set her down carefully, immediately worried about being too rough. "I am not made of glass," Eleanor said with amusement. "I am going to get much bigger than this before the baby comes." But Hank could not help being protective, insisting she rest more and take on fewer heavy chores. Eleanor indulged him because she knew it came from love, though she rolled her eyes at his overprotectiveness when she thought he was not looking. The pregnancy progressed smoothly through fall and into winter. Eleanor remained healthy and energetic, her body adapting well to the changes. Hank spent hours carving a cradle from smooth pine, every detail perfect. Eleanor sewed tiny clothes and blankets, her hands moving with practiced skill. They made a trip down to Los Animas in early winter, before the heavy snows came, to stock up on supplies and consult with Dr. Whitmore about the birth. The doctor examined Eleanor and pronounced her in excellent health. "The baby should come sometime in late February or early March," he said. "I strongly suggest you come back to town a few weeks before your due date so I can be present for the birth. Mountain births can be risky, especially for a first child." But Eleanor shook her head firmly. "I want to have my baby in my own home, in the place where they will grow up. Hank will be with me. We will manage." Dr. Whitmore looked at Hank, clearly expecting him to convince his wife otherwise. But Hank just took Eleanor's hand. "If that is what you want, then that is what we will do. But Doc, would you be willing to give me instructions, things to watch for, how to help?" The doctor sighed, but spent the next hour giving Hank detailed guidance on assisting with childbirth, what supplies to have ready, what complications to watch for. He sent them home with extra medical supplies and made Hank promise to come get him immediately if anything seemed wrong. The winter seemed longer that year, perhaps because they were waiting with such anticipation. Hank found himself talking to Eleanor's growing belly, telling their unborn child about the mountains, the animals, the life they would have. Eleanor would laugh and run her fingers through his hair as he knelt beside her chair, his head resting gently against her stomach. In late February, as a late winter storm raged outside, Eleanor's labor began. Hank tried to stay calm, to remember everything Dr. Whitmore had told him, but inside he was terrified. He had faced down bears and mountain lions without flinching, but the idea of something going wrong, of losing Eleanor or the baby, filled him with a fear unlike anything he had ever known. But Eleanor was strong. She labored through the night with determination, gripping Hank's hands so tightly he lost feeling in his fingers, but never complaining. And as dawn broke and the storm cleared, their son was born, entering the world with a lusty cry that made both parents laugh through their tears. "He is perfect," Eleanor whispered, cradling the tiny bundle against her chest. The baby had a shock of dark hair and eyes that would probably lighten to blue like his father's. "Look what we made, Hank. Look at our son." Hank could barely see through the tears streaming down his face. He reached out with one large finger to touch his son's tiny hand, and the baby's fingers immediately curled around it, gripping with surprising strength. "He is amazing. You are amazing. I do not have words for how much I love you both right now." They named him James, after Hank's father. James Xander grew quickly, a healthy, happy baby who seemed to take to mountain life from the start. He rarely fussed, content to be carried around in a sling against Eleanor's chest while she worked or bundled up on the porch where he could watch his father chop wood and tend to chores. 2 years later, their daughter was born, arriving much more quickly than her brother had. They named her Rose, and she proved to have her mother's dark hair and determined personality. Where James was calm and contemplative, Rose was energetic and curious, getting into everything the moment she learned to crawl. Hank and Eleanor's life settled into the contented rhythm of a growing family. The cabin rang with children's laughter, and the valley that had once been so silent now echoed with the sounds of play and learning. Hank taught his children to love and respect the wilderness, taking them on walks to identify plants and animal tracks. Eleanor taught them their letters and numbers, determined they would be educated even in their remote home. Every year they made the trip down to Los Animas, staying long enough to pick up supplies and let the children experience town life. James and Rose were always excited for these trips, but Hank noticed they were equally excited to return home to the mountains. They were mountain children through and through, just as he and Eleanor had hoped. When Rose was 3 and James was 5, Eleanor became pregnant again. This pregnancy was harder than the first two, and Hank worried constantly. But Eleanor remained cheerful, insisting she felt fine even when Hank could see the exhaustion in her eyes. Their third child, another son they named Thomas, arrived on a beautiful spring morning with birds singing in the trees and wildflowers blooming in the meadow. He was smaller than his siblings had been, but healthy and strong, with his father's blue eyes and his mother's determined chin. As the years passed, Hank and Eleanor watched their children grow, finding joy in every milestone and achievement. The cabin was expanded again, and then again, growing to accommodate their family. They added a proper workshop for Hank's woodworking and a larger kitchen for Eleanor's cooking and preserving. Life was not always easy. There were hard winters when supplies ran low, illnesses that frightened them, moments of conflict and frustration. But through it all, Hank and Eleanor remained steadfast partners, facing every challenge together. On their 10th wedding anniversary, they stood on the porch together in the evening light, watching their 3 children play in the yard. James, now 9, was teaching his younger siblings to skip stones in the creek. Rose, 7, was determined to beat her older brother's record. Thomas, 4, was simply happy to be included. "Can you believe it has been 10 years?" Eleanor asked, leaning into Hank's embrace. There were some threads of silver in her dark hair now, and fine lines around her eyes, but to Hank, she was more beautiful than ever. "Best 10 years of my life," Hank replied, kissing the top of her head. "Though sometimes I still cannot believe you chose this life. Chose me." Eleanor turned in his arms to look up at him. "I chose happiness. I chose love. I chose a life where I could be fully myself, where I could raise my children to be brave and kind and true. That is what you gave me, Hank. That is what we built together. We built something pretty amazing, did we not?" Hank's voice was rough with emotion as he looked at their children, their home, the life they had created in this mountain valley. "We did." Eleanor reached up to cup his face, running her thumb along his bearded jaw. "And we are not done yet. We still have so many years ahead of us, so many more memories to make." As if to prove her point, Rose's voice rang out triumphantly. "Papa, look, I got 7 skips. 7! Hank and Eleanor laughed together, and Hank called back, "That is wonderful, Rose, but I think I can get at least 10. Want to see?" He bounded down the porch steps to join his children, and Eleanor followed more slowly, her hand resting on her stomach where the secret she had not yet told Hank was just beginning to grow. Their 4th child, another little life that would fill their home with more love and chaos. She watched her husband kneel beside the creek with their children clustered around him, his large hands patiently showing them the best way to position the stone. This man who had saved her life all those years ago in a dusty Colorado town, who had paid a debt he did not owe and stayed by her side through her darkest hours. This man who had given her a home and a family and a love that filled every corner of her heart. Eleanor smiled, thinking back to that desperate day when she had collapsed in the street, sick and alone and terrified. If someone had told her then that her suffering would lead to this, to a love story more beautiful than any she could have imagined, she would not have believed them. But it was true. Sometimes, the worst moments of our lives lead us exactly where we are meant to be. Sometimes love comes from the most unexpected places, at the most unexpected times. And sometimes, the person who saves us becomes the person we cannot imagine living without. As the sun set behind the mountains, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple, the Zander family headed inside for dinner. The cabin glowed with lamplight, warm and welcoming. Voices and laughter filled the rooms, the sounds of a home full of life and love, and in the years that followed, that home only grew fuller. A 4th child was born, then a 5th. The cabin expanded once more, sprawling across the mountain meadow like a small compound. As the older children grew, they brought home spouses of their own, and soon the sound of grandchildren's laughter joined the symphony. Through it all, Hank and Eleanor remained at the center, the foundation upon which everything else was built. They grew old together, their hair turning silver, their steps slowing. But the love between them never dimmed. If anything, it grew stronger with each passing year, tempered by time and trial into something unbreakable. On their 50th wedding anniversary, surrounded by children and grandchildren who had gathered from across Colorado to celebrate, Hank stood and raised his glass. His hands were gnarled with arthritis now, his face deeply lined, but his blue eyes were as bright as ever. "To my wife," he said simply, "the woman who made a lonely mountain man remember how to live, the woman who gave me everything I never knew I needed, the woman I will love until my last breath and beyond." Eleanor, her own face wet with happy tears, raised her glass in return. "And to my husband, the man who saw me at my lowest point and chose to lift me up, the man who showed me what true strength and gentleness look like, the man who turned my desperation into the greatest love story I could have imagined." Their glasses touched with a soft clink, and around them their family cheered and applauded. Later, when the celebration had wound down and they were alone on their familiar porch, Eleanor rested her head on Hank's shoulder. "Thank you," she said softly. "For what?" "For refusing to walk away that day in the doctor's office. For paying when you did not have to. For staying when anyone else would have left. For loving me through everything. For giving me this life." Hank wrapped his arm around her, holding her close despite the ache in his joints. "I should be thanking you. You took a broken man who thought he was better off alone and showed him what it meant to be part of something bigger. You gave me a family, a purpose, a reason to wake up happy every morning." They sat in comfortable silence, watching the stars emerge in the darkening sky. The mountains rose around them, eternal and unchanging, while their own lives had flowed and shifted like water, carving new paths through the years. But through all the changes, one thing had remained constant: their love for each other, as solid and enduring as the stone peaks themselves. Eventually, as the night grew cold, they went inside together, their movements slow but synchronized after so many years of partnership. They climbed into the bed they had shared for 5 decades, and Eleanor curled into Hank's embrace just as she had on their first night as husband and wife. "I love you," Hank murmured into her hair. "I love you too," Eleanor whispered back, "always and forever." And as they drifted off to sleep, two people who had found each other against all odds and built a beautiful life together, the mountains stood watch over them, silent and protective, sheltering the family that had made it their home. The years continued to pass, as years always do, bringing both joys and sorrows. When Hank passed away at the age of 83, peacefully in his sleep with Eleanor beside him, the entire family gathered to mourn. They buried him in the meadow he had loved, under the aspens that turned gold every autumn, with a simple marker that read, "Hank Zander, beloved husband, father, and friend, a man who knew how to love." Eleanor lived another 4 years, surrounded by her children and grandchildren who took turns staying with her in the cabin she had shared with Hank. She spent those years telling stories about their life together, ensuring that the younger generations understood the love that had built their family. When she finally joined Hank, she was laid to rest beside him, her marker reading, "Eleanor Zander, beloved wife, mother, and friend, a woman who knew how to love." The cabin remains in the family still, passed down through the generations. The valley is fuller now, dotted with several homes where descendants of Hank and Eleanor have chosen to make their lives. But the original cabin stands as a monument to where it all began, carefully preserved and maintained. And sometimes on quiet evenings when the sun sets behind the mountains and the aspens whisper in the breeze, you can almost feel them there still. A mountain man and the woman he saved, whose chance meeting in a doctor's office in Los Animas, Colorado in the summer of 1878 became a love story for the ages. A story of compassion and courage, of healing and hope, of two people who found in each other exactly what they needed to become complete. It was a love born in desperation, but nurtured into something beautiful through dedication and devotion. A love that proved kindness can change everything, that staying when you could have left makes all the difference, that sometimes the best things in life come from the moments when we choose to help someone who cannot help themselves. And in the end, that is the true legacy of Hank and Eleanor Zander. Not just the large family they created or the life they built in their mountain valley, but the simple, powerful truth that love, real love, starts with one person seeing another person's need and choosing to meet it. Everything else flows from there. Their story ended the way all great love stories should, with two people who lived fully, loved deeply, and left the world better than they found it, surrounded by the family and happiness they had built together. No cliffhangers, no loose ends, just a life well lived and a love well earned, complete and whole and perfect in its own way. The mountains stand witness still, sheltering the valley where their story unfolded, a permanent reminder that even in the rough and tumble world of the Wild West, love could bloom and flourish and last a lifetime, and that sometimes the greatest adventures start with a simple act of kindness, a stranger who refuses to walk away, who stays until the healing is done, and then discovers he has found his home.